Let's start by downloading the practice file in Media for this assignment and moving it into your DFM260 folder. Make a projects folder within your 3.1 practice file folder and drag the Premiere project into it. Since this lesson teaches you how to export your project, don't forget to create an exports folder. Open the Premiere file for this assignment. You'll also want to make sure that you're working with your beginner's workspace. If you need to relink the media, pause the video and do that now. This is a really simple project because we just need a sequence with some footage in it to practice exporting media. If your sequence isn't already open, go to the sequence bin and open up the export settings sequence in the timeline panel. It contains a 1-minute portion of a first cut from the short film Meeting Day, which was shot at 1920 by 1080 and 23,976 frames per second. In order to export media from Premiere, you need to first have a sequence open in the timeline panel and then tell Premiere what part of the sequence you want to export and which tracks. Premiere will export video from all the video tracks except for the ones that are hidden with the eye icon. If a track's hidden, Premiere will export black, just like you see in the preview monitor. The audio track's output is determined by the mute and solo buttons. Muted tracks will output silence. If you solo a track, Premiere will export only the audio from that track. Once you have the video and audio tracks set up, you need to tell Premiere which part of the sequence you want to export. You do this by setting an in point for where you want it to start and an out point for where you want it to end. Move your cursor to the beginning of the sequence and hit I on the keyboard to create an in point. Then move your cursor to the last frame of the video and hit O on the keyboard to make an out point. Notice that the timecode bar of the sequence is highlighted in gray to show you what you have selected. So now that we've told Premiere what tracks we want to export and what portion of the sequence, let's open the export settings window to begin the export process. Go to the menu bar, Export, Media. There's a lot going on in this window, so for this course we're just going to cover the basics so that you're able to export a video file to upload to the LMS. Let's start with the left side of the window. This is where you can preview the video that you're exporting. On the right side are the export settings. Just like there's many formats to shoot video and edit video, there's also many formats in which you can export video. Just because you're seeing what your video looks like in the preview monitor doesn't mean it'll look that way when you export it. You need to make sure that you have the right export settings to get your exported video file to look the way you want it. These export settings generally depend on what you're going to do with the video file that you export. Is it going to be uploaded to YouTube? Is it going to be shared via Google Drive? Or is this the final version of the film that you want to save in its highest quality? Knowing the use for the exported video file is essential to determining the export settings, and that's why there's so many options. So to make it simple for this course, we're just going to cover how to export video files to submit to the LMS for your assignments. Really, any other export settings will likely be determined by who's asking for the video file. And once you know how to adjust the settings and what they mean, you can export the video any way you want. Let's start with format. This will determine the type of video file or audio file that you export. And it'll determine the file extension like MOV or MP4. The two most common are QuickTime, which will produce a high-quality, larger size MOV file, and H.264, which will produce a MP4 file that'll likely be smaller in file size. For our purposes, we'll just choose H.264, mainly because we have a 500 megabyte file size limit when uploading to the LMS. Notice that when I choose H.264, Premiere gives me an estimated file size here. Let's keep an eye on this while we look at other settings. Preset is where you can determine the bitrate. Yeah, that probably sounds like technobabble. Okay, let's talk about what bitrate is. The bitrate's going to determine how much data is exported in each second of the video. The more data, the higher the quality and resolution of the exported video. Bitrate is also a big determining factor in the file size of the exported video. The bitrate that you should use is determined by two factors. One is the size of your video. In our case, it's 1920 by 1080. And two, the frame rate. Not necessarily the exact number of frames per second, but basically whether it's over 30 frames per second or under 30 frames per second. 30 frames per second and under is considered standard frame rate. Anything over 30 frames per second is considered a high frame rate and will require a higher bit rate for better export quality. Ours is 23.976, so it's a standard frame rate. Bitrate is measured in megabits per second. A good bitrate for HD video with a standard frame rate and size of 1920 by 1080, like ours, is 10 megabits per second. If we choose a preset of match source, high bitrate, and then we look in the actual bitrate settings under basic video settings, scroll down a bit, you can see that the target bitrate is in fact 10. This is going to produce a high quality export and a file size estimated at 90 megabytes, which is well under the 500 megabyte limit that we have for the LMS. But our video is only 1 minute long. As you try to export longer clips, you may choose to adjust the bitrate to reduce the file size. Let's try changing the preset to match source medium bitrate. That changed the bitrate to 3 and the file size to 27 megabytes. This is going to reduce the overall picture quality of the exported video, but it's really decreased the file size, which could be helpful in some situations. Like if you're just showing the video as a preview to a client for them to give you feedback and changes that they want made to the video. You can also move the bitrate slider to pick your own bitrate and sort of balance the bitrate and the quality with the file size to get the most bang for your buck. Most of the other settings are based on your footage settings. Under basic video settings, you can see that the width and height are 1920 by 1080, the same as our footage, and 23976 frames per second. If you want to change any of these, you can, by unchecking these boxes. If you change any of these settings, you'll notice that your preset changes to custom. And you can also match them all to your footage by clicking Match Source, or you can match everything to your sequence settings by clicking Match Sequence Settings. The last thing that we want to set here is output. This is giving us a preview of what the file will be named. If you click on the file name, you can edit the name and choose where to output your file onto your computer, basically where it's going to save the exported file. When you've located where you want to save the exported video file, click Save. The last step is to click Export within the Export Settings window. When Premiere's done exporting your video, you can view it in Finder. Make sure that you take some time to practice with the settings that you've just learned before moving on to completing this assignment.